It started like any ordinary afternoon outside the mall, shoppers laughing, music playing, life moving as usual. But in seconds, everything changed. A black teenager found himself face down on the pavement, hands trembling, surrounded by officers shouting orders he didn't understand. People froze. Phones came out. Nobody stepped forward. What began as a routine misunderstanding spiraled into a public scene of humiliation until a black SUV pulled up and men in suits stepped out with FBI badges flashing in the sun. The officers' faces went pale. What happens when power meets justice in the most unexpected way? Before that day outside the mall, Marcus Hill was just another 17-year-old trying to balance high school, basketball practice, and weekend shifts at a tech store. He was quiet, respectful, and full of dreams, hoping to follow in his father's footsteps one day, though few knew what his father actually did for a living. To most, Marcus was just the kid who smiled too much and helped older neighbors carry groceries home. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick with life and possibility. Marcus had saved up enough to buy a new pair of sneakers, a small reward for his hard work. He didn't expect anything more than a quick trip, a short line, and maybe a smoothie on the way out. But as he walked through the crowded plaza, he noticed the stairs, small, sharp, lingering a little too long. He tried to ignore them like he'd learned to over the years. Being a young black man in public sometimes meant carrying an invisible target. Still, he kept walking, phone in hand, music in his ears, confidence steady. Just as he stepped toward the store entrance, a police cruiser rolled slowly by. Two officers inside exchanged glances, watching him longer than they should have. Marcus didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. He'd been taught to keep calm, to never give them a reason. He had no idea that within minutes, his life would take a violent turn, that the shopping trip he'd been planning all week would end with flashing lights, raised voices, and the sound of strangers gasping in disbelief. What Marcus didn't know was that his father, the man he admired most, was about to become the last person those officers ever expected to see. The moment came out of nowhere. Marcus was leaving the sneaker store, box in hand, when a voice barked behind him, sharp, commanding, and filled with suspicion. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" He froze, turning to see two uniformed officers stepping out of a patrol car, hands already resting on their belts. Shoppers paused mid-step, sensing trouble before they even knew what was happening. Marcus frowned, confused. "Is something wrong?" He managed to ask, but his words barely mattered. One officer moved closer, eyes scanning Marcus up and down as if searching for guilt in his skin color. The other pointed toward him, muttering something about a reported theft. Marcus felt his pulse spike. He hadn't done anything. He still had his receipt clutched tightly in his hand. "I just bought these," he said, voice trembling slightly as he raised the bag. But before he could finish, one of them lunged forward. The bag hit the ground, sneakers tumbling out as strong hands shoved him against a wall. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone yelled, "He didn't do anything!" But the officers ignored it. Marcus's cheek pressed against the cold surface, the weight of a knee pinning him down. Fear mixed with humiliation, a sickening blend that burned deep in his chest. He heard the phone cameras clicking, recording every second, but in that moment he wasn't thinking about going viral. He just wanted to breathe. He tried to speak, but his voice came out strained. "Please, you're making a mistake." One officer tightened his grip. "Stay down!" The crowd grew louder, their voices blurring into a sea of outrage and disbelief. A mother shielded her child's eyes. A man shouted for the police to stop, but none of it mattered. To those officers, Marcus wasn't a teenager. He was a threat. Then, from across the parking lot, a familiar black SUV slowed to a stop. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. His stride was calm but heavy, his face unreadable. Marcus didn't see him, not yet, but the crowd began to shift, whispering. The man approached quietly, showing no badge, no words of anger. He stood just a few feet away, his eyes locked on the officers holding his son down. One of them turned, irritation flashing in his tone. "Sir, step back. This is police business." The man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, and for a split second, the officers tensed, hands twitching toward their holsters. But what came out wasn't a weapon. It was a black leather wallet with 3 bold letters gleaming from its center. FBI. The onlookers gasped. One officer's face drained of color. The man's voice finally broke the silence, low, steady, and filled with authority. "That's my son." The air turned thick, every eye locked on them. The officers froze, realization dawning too late. Marcus slowly looked up from the ground, confusion etched across his face as he saw the man standing there. His father. And in that frozen second, justice, fear, and truth collided. But the real consequences were only just beginning. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of the crowd, the hum of traffic, even the officers' radios, everything seemed to fall silent as Marcus's father stood there, badge glinting under the afternoon sun. The officers stared, their grip loosening ever so slightly, unsure of what to do next. The confidence that had carried them seconds ago melted into panic. "Get off my son!" his father said, voice cold and deliberate. It wasn't a shout, it was command, authority, the kind of tone that carried the weight of years in federal service. The officers hesitated, glancing at each other, then back to the badge. Finally, they stepped away, muttering excuses about a call that matched a description. Marcus stumbled to his feet, breath shaky, face streaked with dust and humiliation. The world around him felt like it was spinning. Flashes from phones, murmurs from strangers, the echo of injustice ringing in his ears. He looked at his father, but there was no comfort there, only a storm behind his eyes. His father turned toward the officers. "You tackled an innocent kid in front of witnesses," he said quietly. "You humiliated him. You drew your weapons on a teenager who bought shoes." The crowd recorded every word. One officer tried to speak, but the man cut him off with a look. "You should be grateful I'm here as a father, not as an agent." The silence that followed was heavy, a silence built on guilt and fear. Marcus's hands were still trembling as his father reached for him, guiding him toward the SUV. Cameras followed their every move, capturing the sight of a young black teen walking beside an FBI agent, a father who had just exposed the hypocrisy of those who swore to protect. As they drove away, Marcus glanced back at the mall, the place where his innocence was stripped and a lesson carved deep into his heart. The officers stood frozen, the weight of what they'd done pressing hard against their uniforms. But for Marcus and his father, the story was far from over. The following week, the video spread like wildfire, millions of views, thousands of comments and headlines that echoed across every platform. FBI agent's son tackled by police outside mall. For Marcus, it was surreal watching strangers debate a moment that had changed his life. Some defended the officers, others condemned them, but only a few seemed to understand the real pain beneath the surface, the kind that doesn't fade after an apology or an investigation. The police department launched an internal review. The officers were suspended, pending inquiry, but that didn't erase what happened. Marcus's father attended every meeting, calm and professional, though anyone who knew him could see the weight he carried. It wasn't just about his son. It was about every young black boy who'd ever been judged before being heard. Marcus didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. The world had seen him at his most powerless, pinned down, treated as less than human. And even though justice was beginning to move, it felt hollow, like a temporary fix in a broken system. He started to see what his father had always tried to teach him, that silence changes nothing, but standing tall even when you're afraid is its own kind of power. Weeks later, Marcus returned to that same mall. The noise, the lights, the smell of food, everything was the same, yet different. People recognized him now. Some smiled, some whispered, others looked away. But he walked through those doors anyway, head high, heart steady, because this time he wasn't just another kid in a hoodie. He was a reminder that behind every headline is a person, behind every statistic is a story, and behind every act of injustice is a choice, to look away or to stand up. So, the question remains, how many more will it take before equality isn't a headline but a reality?